Okay, with blessings from the gods of technology, we are live and hopefully seamlessly so. Welcome to yet another Wisdom Jam, the sixth in the series, where I am with Arhan today. Hi, Arhan. Welcome.
Yeah, Abhishek. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, same here. Great to be in this conversation. A long held intent actually, Arhan, to jam.
Yeah.
'Cause, I think just experiencing some of your work, your energy, CollabX, felt a lot of resonance and thought it would be great to kind of think together, I guess,
hmm
which is wisdom jams.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and before we start, I'm just going to take a quick moment to just introduce you, I guess, and then maybe we can hop right in. I mean, for me, your energetic footprint is of warm, humble, intellectual energy. Like to me, those are the
Love it.
three.
Yeah.
That's the combination. I see a lot of sharpness, a lot of gentleness, a lot of groundedness. But for those who don't know you, Aran's a founding partner at CollabX, which is a leadership consulting firm which supports mission-driven organizations. Over the last 3 years, more than 50 organizations have partnered with CollabX through leadership sprints. So multiple sprints of different types that CollabX does, and would love to also go more into that through our talk as we go. So thank you for receiving the invite and for coming.
Thanks, Abhishek. Yeah, absolutely. Second what you said. Like I think we've connected in the past, and I think this thread with Wisdom Tree has been going on for a while. So really happy that we're finally able to converge, and especially in the context of a jam. So it's not like some kind of formal thing, and I'm sure those can also happen. But I think love the energy and how you've described this process. So excited to spend the next hour.
Yes. So I'm going to go right to the core intent of this conversation, Arhan, and why this conversation, why with you, why
Hmm.
now?
Right.
Why now? I'll leave the why now to you maybe a bit, but I think uh, one was that as we were working with multiple orgs, the whole dichotomy that there is culture and then there is strategy and then there is operations, of execution. Uh, Boxes, literally like three rooms, rather than seeing them as three kind of integrated things in which reality manifests. And it has been challenging for us to kind of drive home the idea that it's really all one. And these are different perspectives to look at the same process. Uh, and so I don't even know if the question is a valid question, how to integrate because they're already integrated. So how do you see
Right.
that integration maybe, and what is that the nature of that seeing? So I think some of that and then seeing what we understood as CollabX's work, which was really very hands-on, really very action-oriented, execution-oriented, and uh, we felt that you're living that idea in your work. I think that's why we said let's have this chat. And yeah, I think why now? Because in our pre-conversation, you had some interesting thoughts on why now. So let me push that as the first question to you. Why this conversation now? Why? Yeah, why? Yeah, let's start with that. Maybe Simon Sinek will be happy. We're starting with why.
Yeah, yeah. We can then the how, then the what. Yes, so we'll follow and send the video to him. Um, so yeah, I think first thing I was mentioning, right before we started, how there's kind of a nervous excitement right now, and so like one level of just my response to why now is at a very personal level, which is I think last like 3-4 years, as I was mentioning, I haven't actually done something like this. And in a former life, like there was a lot of these conversations, there were a lot of dialogues. Was privileged to kind of be a part of a lot of this, and what I've seen is that over the last few years, like I almost see it as kind of a deep immersion within teams, and within the context of organizations, within the context of teams, coming out of my own experiences, my own kind of questions that I wanted to explore together with friends who are now co-founders. And so one part of the why now is that like it's been a while since I kind of almost emerged out of the water and tried to consolidate and process things and share it. So I think that process of consolidation, like so much of my day to day has been like like going from one team to another, like being really in the trenches, in the deep kind of areas of change, etc. And so the zooming out is beautiful. And like I've really enjoyed actually the last couple of days as I've been thinking more about this, as I've been sitting with operations, culture, strategy, like all of these things. So that's one part of like why now. Like I feel there is now a certain readiness, a certain ripeness within me to kind of surface and start sharing some of this. That's one level. I think another level of why now, which is probably more outside in, is in the context of, I think, where organizations are, where I think society is, and like the title I think resonated, and in particular the word integrate, and integration, and so like I think there's quite, there's so much division, there's so much fragmentation that we see, and of course at a societal level, but organizations see them as microcosms of similar things, and I think one of the key divisions I think is between, like, I think operations and culture, between these different rooms, as you said, and actually, like as I was thinking about today, like what I realized is it's not just a division, which is kind of almost, it feels a little neutral that this is in one room, this is in another room. I think there's actually a hierarchy. And I think that is what really interested me. And that's part of what I wanted to jam with you on also. It seems like there is a hierarchy, and it seems like operations might be at the bottom end of that hierarchy. And like basically doing it's not very sexy. It's kind of boring. It's the stuff that yeah, it'll get done. Like let's focus first on strategy. Let's focus on culture, and then the how will take care of itself kind of approach. And I think that is a mindset I've seen just time and again across lots of organizations, across a lot of spaces I've been in, and so that's another part of the why now. I think there's almost a rebalancing that needs to happen. And yeah, like I think starting with these kinds of conversations will help us to make one, see it ourselves, and then share it with others.
Yeah. So if I hear you correctly, Arhan, you're saying strategy, culture, and operations in that almost hierarchy where operations is left to the field and the strategy is left to the kind of the core team, and then culture is HR or the people's kind of something of that sorts.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think like it's the classic. I mean, the title says operations and culture. I think the missing sibling, as you've rightly brought in, is strategy, and like the Amar Akbar Anthony gets complete with that, and so I think strategy is that one kind of sibling that is like, it's celebrated, it's the high achieving, like almost like, as I was trying to kind of almost see these as human beings, like what would they look like? and so one sibling basically, which is the strategy sibling, is kind of put on a pedestal. It's almost type A, it's high achieving, it's pretty sexy. Then I see another sibling, which is like culture, which is more like the really nice, cool, hip kind of sibling right now. And that's very in right now in this current space, time that we find ourselves. And finally, the operations is that one sibling who's in a corner, very introverted, like by himself or herself, and no one's really talking to that person. and so yeah, like I think that's a lighter note. So
no, it's a beautiful visualization. I think yeah. So for me, I think one of the things that drove me to culture very strongly when we were doing Wisdom Tree.
Yeah.
In the political space, I have seen culture being leveraged / weaponized, whichever way you look at it.
Right.
I could use the language of leverage and say people understood the power of culture and mobilized consensus of societies towards certain things. Or I could say they weaponized culture and hit the sweet spots of the society, tapped into like the unconscious biases and the wounds, and so whichever way you look at it, what I guess what I saw from my reflection in the socio-political space was that culture's really been it's been used. I'm not going to go into the ethics of it, the intent of it. That can become a whole different rich conversation. But broadly, and I say used with a little bit of a disappointment, I guess. In the sense, I don't know, culture as a given would have been nice, but I think it's been brought into the drawing room. Maybe or to use your three sibling thing. Maybe the hip guy was doing his own thing or doing her own thing, and life was
Right.
going on, but the family dragged them into the center of it,
Right.
and yeah, I mean, just some kind of, there's something there for me. I think there's some emotional
Mhm.
charge around it. And
Yeah.
then I was like, oh, this has to be then a force for good, because if you unleashing it as a force, then unleash it for the good of everybody, because it is a very
Mm.
powerful force. And and yeah, I think that drove me towards culture, but also I'm mindful of the whole almost Brahminical preoccupation with strategy, right?
Right.
It's so pure and clean at 30,000 feet. There is
Right.
almost no pollution, and the plane is just flying. There is no traffic, no honking, because you are at
That's
30,000.
great. Yeah, totally.
And but life is not happening in the aeroplane. Life is happening in the ground, which is all messy.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think, yeah, so I guess just to come back to this, I think it's almost like people want to, a lot of us don't want to be around reality, right? Like the operations is the closest to truth. It's the closest to reality. And just a minute, yeah,
Yeah.
operations is closest to reality, and it's almost like you want to fly away from reality because it's
Yeah.
cool to be in that. I don't know. That's I'm trying to understand. That's probably where the hierarchy comes from, right? We've made one thing very fashionable,
Yeah.
fancy, chick, and the other one, like you said, the introverted in the corner sibling,
Yeah.
right?
No, I think that resonates, and I think each of us have that kind of, I think, deep personal place from which the work is flowing. And I know that definitely holds for you. And as you're saying, like, I think for very long now, and very long here being like hundreds, thousands of years potentially, I think thinking has been elevated. And ideas, thinking, strategy, as you said, and you kind of connected that with caste as well. I think there is definitely, I see a connection, and thinking is on a pedestal, and doing, and so doing with hands, for example, is at the lowest rung, and manual work, etc. So I think that same division plays out whether you see any kind of hierarchy where white collar is always higher than blue collar, and there is tremendous experiential wisdom that exists in quote unquote blue collar. In as you said, they are the closest to reality. So in fact, the most amount of wisdom around what reality is might actually exist at that level versus at 30,000 feet, and so you have to kind of go deeper into that territory, and somewhere it's been reversed, and part of it is it's definitely, I think, easier to think, and harder to do. So there is that, but I think there is a deeper kind of thing here, which is it's not as neutral. There is definitely a caste angle here as well around how thinking, and strategy, etc., has been put on a pedestal over hundreds and thousands of years. So yeah, you're absolutely right on that. And like, as I was listening to you, so with wisdom tree also as and culture as an entry point, like, would love to hear more about like that. Like, how did you connect that to the work that you're currently doing through wisdom tree?
Uh, yeah, I mean, just the potency of culture, because for me, the entry was from training and then learning and
Right.
development, OD, then
Right.
saying that all this is good, but people are just contextual creatures. We're
Right.
responding to our context all the time. And if you're not, we're responding to the stories, the mental models.
Right.
And if you don't grab that with your hand and start moving around that, uh, you're just like skimming the surface.
Yeah.
But when you go deep into the very kind of, these are the very nuts and bolts of a collective consensus.
Yeah.
And when you go into that, to me, one has to go with a lot of authenticity, ethics, consciousness, because it's very potent work. I think that's, and I think what took me there was, one, because it's potent work, and two, because I trust myself with the potent work. That okay, if it unleashes power, we can be custodians and trustees of the collective, because otherwise culture work can also be very, very manipulative, right? I can change the common story that's told in the org, and you shift a story that's percolating the org, and suddenly what is right becomes wrong, what is wrong becomes right, because human beings are such contextual creatures. So for me, the fuzziness of it was definitely alive. And at the same time, like you said, the real manifestation of culture is as lived. It's in the workshop space, or in, you can talk as much about it and do some fancy games, work, maps, models, but really taking it to the ground is the hard work of living the culture, right? And it's almost like yeah, that the nitty-gritties and translating, bringing it down to reality. I think to me there's definitely the real value doesn't get realized in the mental modeling of culture or in the dreaming up of it, but in the embodying and living of it. And that's why I think that the third sibling, to again, that's a sticky metaphor you used. The third sibling actually holds the key to the family in a way, because without that, it can just become like this party where people are just talking away. And yeah, and before that, Arhan, I wanted to share also a personal kind of almost confession, right? That with management, I'm a management person by training.
Yeah.
The whole incentive structure is to jump to strategy. The whole incentive structure is to move to consult. To the more abstract you move, the more incentivized it is.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
political almost that there's a whole system that is keeping this in place.
Yeah.
And I think it's worthwhile to challenge that system, which values the abstraction, values the strategy, devalues the doing, devalues the person who's doing, and the wisdom of that person, right? I think to me that's how I see uh, that happening. And I see you or Collabex also living it by saying that we will not hang out at strategy. We'll come down with you into the ops and we'll live the message. Almost something like that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're articulating it way better than I would, and so I think it's absolutely you're absolutely right, and like part of and I had a actually question, and I'll just park it so that we can come back. I think it's really important what you said around abstraction, and the higher up you go, more abstract things get, and things like organizations and these are all abstract, right? Like reality is people, and so it's you're here, I'm here, there are a few other people on this call. That's the reality, and then organization, etc. Is kind of this fiction that we kind of build together, and we co-create, and it's not really a real thing, and so it involves abstraction at its fundamental level. And now the thing with abstraction, as you said, like the higher up you go, but what I have experienced is people who are very close, quote unquote, to the ground again, people who are in a kind of doing zone, etc. I've also seen them struggle with abstraction. Right. And so when you said, how do we challenge or we should challenge, like the immediate question that came up is, how do we challenge? How do we challenge a status quo which incentivizes the cool sounding stuff, the big ideas? The one of the ways I see it, and would love to hear your experience, is that I think people at every level and people at the front lines, like I think frontline, first mile, whatever name we give it, I think at that level, if they start being able to go from micro to macro, from the concrete to the abstract, and I've seen lots of examples where this has happened, where this process is like I think going from concrete to abstract, I've seen people like make that journey easier, like more easily than people coming in from the top, like someone who's in the zone of ideas, trying to translate that into execution. I've seen that person really struggle. The other way is actually easier, but still there are struggles along that journey. There is confidence, there is language, metaphor, like all of these things which come so naturally to us now. We've been doing it for a long time. I see people struggle with that, and so I think the only way I see it is we have to challenge by getting people to be very comfortable just playing at all levels. But I think doing in reality remains the cornerstone.
So you anchor in reality and build comfort to
go up and down.
Go up and down the yeah.
And I was curious coming in because like I think you've got some wonderful experiences working, I think, in the space of say youth movements and in organizing. So I think community organizing, youth movements, like there's a compared to say a formal organizational setup, I think there is a natural energy there which I think is in the zone of doing, is in the zone of change, it's in the zone of a kind of energy of activism, etc. And so what has been your experience around the abstraction versus the doing, right? Like have you seen people be able to kind of make that jump? Have you seen struggle?
So I've seen the doing is really in youth movements, but also in general, I think the doing is really the energizer for most people.
Yeah,
that's when it's visceral. That's when it's real. to be honest, like for me, strategy, theories of change and all, I struggle with them because I find the complexity in the world so high that
Right.
any articulation of a theory of change for any complex adaptive system seems like a reduction, right? So for me, I've kind of stayed away from that realm.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, the story, right, the culture really gives the energy for the doing, right? What makes a young person or anybody having freedom struggle for me is a great example. What makes a bright young person sacrifice a juicy, lucrative career in law, maybe in UK, and have comfort, but say, okay, I'll give it all up. I'll dress differently. I'll go. There is something that gripped the consciousness, right? And for me, culture is that invisible thing that infuses action, and it changes the context of the action. So while you were sharing, it came to me those three karigars with the marble block, and the first one says I'm cutting marble, the other one
Right.
says I'm building the temple, the third one says I'm discovering God.
Right.
Something like that. And so
Right.
what's different is the marble block is same, the work is same, but the context, the story, the and so to me, where operations and culture meet, or to me, culture has the power to illuminate operations into something very spiritual, very powerful, very impactful. And it just shifts, it's a shift of context, right? You didn't change anything, neither the tool nor the marble block. You changed the story that the person was acting
Right.
from.
Right.
And to me, therefore, the second sibling can really work with the third sibling to to bring it to its rightful place. I think to me that is definitely the role of the role that's there. And again, the other thing I think when we were speaking was also, I find a very culturally grounded approach that you're following, because like for me, Nai Talim, when Gandhiji spoke about Nai Talim and the Gandhi Vinoba tradition that I identify with, I mean, it was meant to be very real. I mean, they're in fact like they're like keep specialization out. Like let's let everybody do everything. Let's all get real, right? Because the wisdom of all of life, which is not divided into parts, is tapped there.
Yeah.
I think so. For me, some of the thinkers, so-called, we put on our banknotes and we put on we celebrate holidays. What they stood for, in fact, was the value of working with hands, the dignity of that, and I feel we've forgotten that. No? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think
Yeah.
that's been a big source of inspiration as well. So there were lots of wonderful, I think, moments spent in Ahmedabad, in communities, in grassroots organizations there, and I think where a kind of Gandhian ethic is very strong, and I think saw that time and again. Like I remember one of the earliest memories was this use of the word like daily practices, and so like as you know, like a big part of my inspiration comes from sports, and so in a sporting context, like that's so obvious. Like we practice every day, right? You show up for training, and that is the operations equivalent. Like you've got to show up to train every single day, and you don't talk about it, you do it. And then suddenly in this very different context of social change, these are organizations like Manav Sadhana that have been doing it for decades. There is such a deep focus on it's let's not talk as much about something like integrity or these things, but let's practice it on a daily basis, and so the practicing is where the emphasis clearly was. That was a big kind of moment because I was coming straight out of college into this kind of environment. College again, like you just pack the head up with all of this stuff, and so that was a big unlock moment for me.
And showing up, I think that's such an important word, because showing up is somehow I think there's something there, Arhan, because if I unpack showing up, there is fear, there is reluctance, there is comfort zones, and just the act of showing up with other people to do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
I do sense in many pockets of organization subtle resistance by the so-called leadership team or to show up.
Yeah.
And I can relate to it for myself, but there are times when I'm like, just go do it. Don't tell me the details. Like this is the idea. Just do it and tell me how it went. I don't want to come with you into actually doing it, right?
Yeah.
So I think showing up is something that is on a daily basis, like you said, right? So I think that's precious. Yeah. So sports is one you shared, and then your experiences in Ahmedabad is the other one that inspired you to kind of engage in this particular way. I'm curious, over time, how has this insight, or what have been learnings? How's that honed? Uh, what are you feeling more convinced about? What are you feeling more doubtful about as you do this work?
Hmm. Yeah, like I think at a personal level, um, the thing that I'm feeling more confident about is some of the things we're talking around, like how operations culture, like doing, and confidence in doing, and then the story around why you're doing, like those two things have to be very close, and so that image of, as you said, the people cutting the marble, like the showing up is kind of showing up every day to cut or break or whatever, but the why behind it is where I think culture like infuses that with a deeper meaning, which generates the motivation, the will to continue. I think like my entry into all of this, and that, initially it was in my head like a big weakness, like I have no formal background to training in anything that I'm currently doing, and so I think that has been part of where the confidence comes from, which is that, like, whether it's management, whether it's coaching, whether it's like team org dev, like none of this actually happened from an academic kind of thing. It happened through actually like doing and failing, and the usual cycle that we say, like doing a lot of things, learning from there, and so that I think has been a big part, but a lot of the early years was actually spent in the zone of strategy. Like so when you invited me for this also, like there was an aha moment of the invitation itself, because I was like, wow, I'm being invited to something that puts operations here, and then I would never put myself 4 or 5 years back in that box. I would actually put myself in the box where I'd be invited to talk more about like a strategic process and all of that. So it's been a really, like, I think, interesting journey, going from this world of strategy, getting teams to kind of vision things together, etc., to a world of doing. And I think sports is really one very strong kind of influence there, because again, like so much of sports, and the 90% is not in game time, it's on the training pitch, right? And so that's where show up really matters, and we know this, like it's again so obvious in that context. You talk to any top athlete, and they're all referring to all of the years spent in training, and not the 10 seconds or the 90 minutes or the 8 hours spent on the match, in the match time. And so I think doing in operations is just everything there, and then culture again gives that the particular energy around how the doing happens, right? And this type of doing versus that type of doing, depending on the type of game we want to play. So I think that's a big angle to this, and that's why I see like these start to really merge, which is like understanding like what's the game that we're playing, right? And where do we play this game, like, etc. Those are questions like which are very useful from a strategic standpoint, and they sound very simple, but I think for collab as well, like an easy way to bucket us is like a consulting firm, right? And at the same time, so a consulting firm might require a certain type of culture, right? But I think the journey for us has been in constantly like going through cycles of doing, and through the doing, there is an intelligence that emerges around actually what type of learning is really important here. What is the core model in which we work with teams? The fact that we completely like stopped working in one-off events or workshops. So we said that we're not going to work in events or workshops. We're going to focus on 6-week sprints. The sprint allows for habit building to happen. That requires showing up consistently. Like all of that was not a strategic process. It was an operations process.
Interesting.
I think similarly, like, again, like something like sales, I'd never done anything around, selling like that again, like over 10 years, 12 years, like I think all my formative years were in the nonprofit space. And so the relationship with money is all over the place. It's a very warped relation. And so I think starting to feel confidence around like selling, I think was another, but again, like, talking about it, understanding a sales framework, like how a funnel works, like all of that again might have been how I approached it 5-10 years ago. But again, it's all through doing, and selling and trying it and going through those cycles, that again has allowed for that, and how we kind of approach that. So I think a lot of the last 2 years, 2-3 years has been like there's a ton of doing, there's a ton of like unknowns that get then known, like turning unknowns into known, I think is a doing and learning process. And then I think where I see the culture really fit in for us is, like, as we started to do this, we saw that our starting point was, like, there is a lot of division and fragmentation, right? And there are all kinds of divisions. There are divisions between people, there are divisions within people. There is tremendous burnout and stress and fatigue in organizations. There are silos between people, silos between teams, functions, etc. There is division between organizations, and so there is division at all of these levels. But interestingly, there are other kinds of divisions like operations and culture, right? Like a family versus a team, right? Doing versus learning. So there are these divisions that also exist. And so the way we have tried to approach culture right now is, like, there are these creative kind of these tensions that exist, and we have to kind of figure out how to hold these in the doing, right? So one example is, like, doing and learning, I think is an easy one. And so whenever there is an unknown problem, like, first do and then quickly learn. So don't think. And a lot of this inspiration comes from the teams and organizations that we work with, that again have a strong doing culture, right? So that has kind of we have absorbed it through osmosis there. And so I think why this is, again, almost links back to the why now that we started. Like, there are so many unknown problems, complex problems that exist in the world. Like, I think strategy completely falls flat there, because there are too many unknowns, too many variables. Problem is uncertain, etc. I think culture is very powerful there because it gives you an anchoring kind of starting point, and then doing operations is how the learning happens. And so all the kind of unknowns get resolved through that. So I think that's a long-winded answer to that question.
I think, that's that's I think that's also, to me, somehow even the action reflection process, trying and all, to me seems very Gandhian in terms of experiments with truth. Like, I'm not force fitting it. I genuinely
yeah.
It is very, very it reminds me a lot, evokes a lot of that thought. I think the question that's coming to me, Arhan, is around preferences, and I'm just wondering aloud with you that while we said that it would be great for people to be able to move across the spectrum from the very abstract to the very concrete, and yet I'm assuming each of us will have a preferred location. Like, okay, and to me, I think the problem is the rigidity of being stuck in any one position, and the politics of the up and down of these positions, right? But it would be much better if, instead of these three being like strategy, culture, operations, would be a flat three kind of moving around, and people can move around the musical chairs, but I have my favorite corner, and I choose I choose this corner, but I've checked out the other corner. I respect it. I see what it does. And to me, that restoring of balance, I think some of the work you're doing, some of the work we're doing, is a lot of this rebalancing what has gone, which is no longer functional. Maybe it was functional in the industrial era.
It served its purpose. It served its
purpose. But I think the process is rebalancing. And in some ways also, I see your work as a little bit of a countercultural kind of saying, let's make doing sexy again. Let's stop obsessing over stuff, and let's get down. So I think how you've lived it. But I think the other, and coming back to Prakriti, I'm saying that the nature, the innate style, like the learning and doing style, is something I hear you say. Like, you pretty much build theory grounds up from your lived experience. I think that's where it is. And for me, I've experienced my own journey coming in from the other side, which is your classic learn the concept, then see if it works or not, and modify. But the starting point is then, in that Kolb's learning cycle, the abstract conceptualization, reflective observation side, and then. And so I'm also wondering how much of these are preferences. Do organizations develop their own preferences? And I'm just wondering aloud, saying how much of this is in the realm of preferences versus how much of this is in the realm of what works. So I don't have an answer, and I guess the question formulation is fuzzy, but I think I'm saying how much of this is also preferences vis-a-vis a general rule across. I'm trying to tease out that nuance in your experience. Is it that there are orgs and people who have preferences of learning by doing, or are you also saying that actually that in today's day and age, that is the way, because all theories have come from the past and they've come on assumptions which are changing? So there is your position. Curious on that.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think what's immediately coming up is, like, first and foremost, starting from, like, again, what's the need, and what's the game that we need to play, right? And so there are maybe certain types of, like, if the outer game demands certain kind of things, then we have to flow, and like, I think another inspiration is Bruce Lee, and just like be water. And so, like, the ability to understand, and this is again not an analytical process,
Yeah.
like it's not doing market research, and it's not understanding the landscape, and but it's understanding the core, like what's the game that we're playing, and hence how do we need to operate, who do we need to be. I think that process again of the inner and the outer being in alignment. So for example, what I mean is, like, I think in the work that CollabX does, I think a big part of how we need to operate is there's a lot of openness, there's a lot of learning orientation, and so in some ways these are kind of muscles that are very well developed, say in the world of consulting, right? Going from, different contexts, one client to another, building a learning orientation, like managing knowledge really well, like looking out for like becoming very good listeners and observers. So I think, those are muscles that are, I think, very well suited for that kind of a game. But if the outer game is one of manufacturing, then probably I don't know if it's the same kind of muscle. It might be a different kind of muscle. Like a very interesting example, there was one team that we were working with, which is kind of an aerospace company, and so that was like a completely alien territory for us. And there, like, what I saw, like, in the culture was just an insane attention to detail, right? And then when kind of went deep, and attention to detail, the way it showed up is, they're talking about like millimeters. They're talking about errors that at that level, right? And the reason is simple, because they're supplying to Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all of this, and so their kind of precision and attention to detail has to be very solid. Hence, their operations needs to be like that, and hence the cultural kind of value has to be like attention to detail is really key. Like a huge process orientation, a lot of checklists, right? Because the stakes are high. You make a mistake of 10 millimeters, and suddenly the whole shipment kind of goes off. So that's the culture that needs to develop. And in another context, in the world of consulting, it's something else. So I think that is how I'm currently seeing it. Every team needs to figure out what their zone is.
Yeah, no, that's very beautifully put, Arhan. I think this, what you visualized in that example, from what is the context requires, and therefore what
Yeah.
we do, and therefore what is the culture that will allow us to do what that context requires. And I think
Yeah.
you guys also take it all the way to, therefore, what is my inner game that will allow me to embody
Right.
this. And I
Right.
think so that's rich. The question that came up to me from a culture practitioner standpoint was this: what game we are playing. Of course, there is
Yeah.
a stated game, but in organizations where I've found
Yeah.
like all kinds of games, and not-for-profit sector, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
especially, right? Like, are you playing the impact game? Yes, of course, but like if you ask deeply, say, what is the real game? Is this
Yeah.
signaling? Is this the
Yeah. Yeah.
founder's glory game? Is this the survive and get by game?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also wondering, like, the complexity of the organization is that there are various sub games that are getting played while the stated game is something.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wonder
Yeah.
if you encountered that messiness, and has it been possible to bring people authentically onto saying that, guys, you have your micro games, but like, let's what? So how's that been like, navigating the org politics around these micro games, and some of them conflicting ones? I don't know. Just curious about that.
Yeah. Again, fascinating. And that's the, I think, thrill and beauty of, I think, working in this space. Like, context is ever changing, and like it's truly different. Like I think us on this call right now, in this moment, like that moment is changing, we are changing. So I think that process is so dynamic, and so it's easy to say that, think about the context first, then figure out what your game needs to be, and then figure out your inner game. Like, it sounds very nice, but I think it's much more dynamic. And so in an
Mhm.
org context, I think there are different kinds of games, as you said. So one way to see the game is, like, the subcultures that might exist in an organization. So, like, one thing I really enjoy is, like, a frontline team has a very different kind of cultural energy, beliefs, versus, say, a sales and marketing team, in a non-profit context, a fundraising team. Like, I think one of the friction points
Yes.
in terms of games that we are playing, like the fundraising team is playing a certain game which involves a lot of grant writing, research, proposals, those kinds of conversations. So their loops of work, their operations loop is much slower. A frontline team has a very different operation cycle, and so it's much faster because things are changing on the ground, etc. And so actually they're playing different games. So while the overall mission of the organization kind of provides a boundary that okay, we might be working towards educational change in these kinds of schools, etc., or it might be healthcare or whatever else. Actually, all of these sub things are happening, and so the way we've tried to grapple with this is again bringing in like just one having fun with it and bringing in sports again, right? Because when you said rebalance the pyramid, right? Like one of the ways I saw is that like imagine people say we want to be a sports team. Okay, let's try and be a sports team, right? So let's imagine we're a football team, and a football team has a front line, a midfield, and a defense. Right. So what we've actually done is instead of operating with the typical org pyramid, we've mapped teams onto a frontline, a midfield, and a defense. And so a frontline team might involve like a program team in a nonprofit, right? A program team, this program, that program, working with schools, working with primary healthcare centers, working on whatever else. Midfield teams, are ones that push the ball up to the front line and make them more effective. And so the ball here is they could be creating communications, they could be creating tools, they could be creating products, right? So products, tools, comms, etc., are being pushed up to the front line to make them more effective. And then a defense holds the fort at the back. And so fundraising, finance, legal, HR, those are the kind of functional teams that sit in the defense line. And so now suddenly the conversation has shifted from this team versus that team to questions like, where did the ball get dropped? Where did we pass the ball really well? What is the interconnectedness now is not this like fancy kind of fluffy thing, because in a football context, like who's passing the ball where, like who has to play which role, it's just very simple. And so there is a natural, like you can easily see that there is a weak linkage there's a pattern of like the ball being dropped between say fundraising and this programmatic team, right? And so then we go deeper into okay, what's the real tension here, and what's so that kind of a conversation then is possible because the language exists for it. And so again, that's one way we've tried to bring in that frontline has a different game that they're playing, a midfield has a different game, a defense has a different game. We need to play together in order to score.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I think for us, what has happened is also, so for me, I guess, I don't know, politics obviously has been one of those domains I keep getting fascinated by. And just also conceptualizing human beings as political creatures. What I think where I've reached with the culture conversation is your classic prisoner's dilemma, right? Where if the two prisoners do not confess, they both can go away.
Right.
And one of them confesses, the other one gets screwed. So for us, the challenge is how do you build enough trust between the two prisoners that they do not confess and show them that there is that possibility just if you all manage to not confess. Right. Then there's a chance. Can you believe in that possibility and give this a chance? And I think because people get locked into these game theoretic equations of politics and one-upmanship and so on. But if you're able to shift the consensus to saying that it is possible, play that game using the same game metaphor instead of the I'll game to saying everybody can the possibility. So for me, I think that for me also goes into a little bit of a spiritual root of saying that the meta, the well-being of everybody. Like, can I locate myself in the well-being of everybody rather than just jostling for my well-being and shift that possibility? I think so. For me, a lot of the game playing and the game shifting of moving from only my game to my and collective game and saying it's possible. It is possible that the other person can also win. It is possible everyone can win. So the idealist in me, I think, drives some of my my culture saying, that
I completely agree, Abhishek, with that. And again, coming back to like shifting the game, I think, and the way people see it, again, it's shifting the story that people see, the shared story. Like, so it's not like my vertical story versus your vertical story in the context of an organization. It's the collective org story, or maybe there's a larger ecosystem story or a mission kind of story, etc. So I think that's powerful. Like one of the things, like what is a precondition for that. Like I've seen that readiness is something that needs to be there. And so in your prisoners example, right, if certain readiness is not there, then like no matter what we do to facilitate, etc., it's not going to happen. And so how does readiness happen? Like I think people have to hit a certain wall, and they have to get really badly stuck. And so what I mean here is the reason I am kind of doing this with Collab, and the same holds true for Sahil, Shruti as well, my co-founders, is that like at various points we've all hit a certain wall, and so my wall that I hit was in this kind of division between, like, in the context of an organization strategy, how do you translate it into execution? It's not happening. There's all of this kind of, we're going in circles, like just getting paralyzed. So that was one type of wall of, org fragmentation that I experienced. Individuals might experience that with nature. There's a planetary kind of division, etc. So in the org context, again, I think, like, for people to be ready, I think, have they experienced the pain of or the impact of not doing that? And so if the status quo is that fundraising doesn't need to talk, and the CEO or the founder needs to jump in and keep doing it, like that equilibrium will keep happening. The founder will get tired, fatigued over a period of time trying to pick up these dropped balls, and so I think until one of them or both together hit that wall, and things break, then I think it opens up a certain readiness. And maybe there are other ways too, but that has been.
No, that's interesting. I was reflecting back to what you shared, and for me, I think what got evoked was the well. Like, one is the wall, which is like
The wall,
the
yeah, nice.
I think for me, with my mental health and with bipolar, and particularly manic cases of bipolar, you fall in a well,
right.
And from well, I think the visual is the constructed nature of everything, right? And it becomes so real because reality just goes for a toss and it's jumps across. And
powerful, yeah.
One of the things that experience of being out of shared reality is starting to see that this is so fluid and made up, though it feels very solid.
Yeah.
And so for me, landing back into shared reality culture felt like one of those things which is not as, like, actually it's made up of blocks. So for me, I guess I'm saying personally, for me, not organization. For me, it was a fall into a well, and then coming out of the well and saying, oh God, so this is what's. So it's almost like the wall is held in place. Also for me, it feels very solid, but actually with attention and energy, the wall can dissolve, right? In some way, like the organizational attention and energy given to that block dissolves it, because there is group wisdom, there is, and so yeah. So for me, I think also just connecting back to saying that the act of giving attention and energy to the stuckness starts dissolving it, because now there's a systematic, methodical effort to shift. So yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that the readiness is something that is that drives people. In touch with where was my own stuckness, and that's why the
and that openness, I think it comes from those kinds of experiences where, like, how if you're closed, then no matter what reality is hitting you in the face, you're not kind of seeing it. And so, like, when you speak about, like, this shift of this collective story, etc., like, how do we get into that zone? How do we enter? And so is it, starting with, say, like, I'll give a concrete example. Like, earlier, and I've seen this time and time again, like, where do organizations start a kind of a process of, say, strategy or whatever? Like, I've seen a heavy bias towards vision, right? And vision, like these wonderful words, ideas, again, the future scenarios, like all of that. And the other starting point to me is reality, and kind of looking and seeing reality together. And so, like, of course, it's a loop, but like, my current kind of perspective is that start with reality together. So with the two prisoners, get them to see what their reality is and that they're stuck together. Right. In the context of, I think the largest examples that I'm aware of is, say, in South Africa, early days of apartheid, post-apartheid, that whole kind of transition. like I think the seeing of collective stories for the future started with facing that reality that this nation is not going to survive in this current way. And I think seeing that reality and not intellectually, but like feeling it together, being able to understand the impact it's going to have on me. I think that seeing together of reality allows for then an openness to a shared story, which is different and all of that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's so to me, like there are different types of people, if I have to say, and there's one set of people who, when they face the reality, say, boss, this is done, we need to move, let's up our game.
Right.
To me, there is two more kind of levels of consciousness, if I have to say it. One consciousness which is differently developed, where you see reality and makes people feel even more insecure. For example, running to catch the local train seat. Or I mean, that's a crude example, but I'm saying it can evoke something in a certain type of people.
Yeah.
And for
More
me,
fear. Yeah.
Could be right. The same evocation. The reality also has to evoke the possibility of something.
Yeah.
And for me, the readiness, or the way I tend to approach that readiness, is from a evocation of something beyond. It's almost like when we hear a good musician, we feel lifted that, boss, there's something there.
Yeah.
And for me, the orgs where I work, or and now we're getting more unapologetic about using Indian language. So we say there is a yug dharma, right? The calling of the times.
Yeah.
The times are calling you to up your game. Like,
totally.
You can keep saying this, but this is the calling of the times. This is the dharma of the organization. It's taken this sankalp.
Yeah.
In the context of the yug dharma. So just evoking. Yeah, so to be evocations, there's a part of each of us that is a part which is dreamy, which is, and I somehow, for me, vision is not the word, because for me, evocation of a certain spirit and energy. Like, so for me, a lot of this work has been very energetic. How do we evoke the shared group energy and bring the group into that possibility, let them glimpse that possibility, and that inspires people to, because it's like, for whose sake, right? So there are organizations where I work, where there may be people saying, yeah, it's okay, my life goes on. It's like, I don't feel achiever enough. I'm very happy keeping my job, and I'm very happy doing this. You can't inspire me. My life is safe right now. I'm happy, and this is enough, right? So the assumption that you will get inspired itself. So for me, with those kind of people, evocations have worked. Saying, okay, don't do it for your own fulfillment. I know you're fulfilled, but there is a higher possibility of a country or a beneficiary or humanity. And I do feel there's a part in each of us that can be appealed to. And of course, I have to go deep into my own goodness or my own same part, and only then mutually we're able to evoke that higher.
Correct.
So I think, so for me, that readiness has come from evocations, I think. Yeah. And saying that, can we evoke that in each of us?
Yeah. Seems like two sides of the same coin. The evocation, possibility, reality, and I think both could be entry points.
Yeah, and I think this is very org specific. I feel, Arhan, like there are orgs which are innately very achievement oriented and who get inspired, who don't want to stay stuck anymore.
Right.
There are equally orgs who are very stable, equilibrium orgs who also have conditions where they can get by, and for them a different recipe works. And I think, like you said, each one is so contextual. Like, be like water. Like, what is each org?
What's happening? What's needed?
And seeing what's happening.
Yeah.
And there are several questions coming to me, but I know there is times I'm going to choose the one that is most pressing. Because and that for you, Arhan, is what about your own biases and ways of seeing? How does one account for that? Like, when you approach and, like you said, be like water, but to be like water, you would have to have a very, you'd have to be very clean in your side, right? How does that happen? How do you manage to do that? Does that even happen? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think, again, great question. And like, I think different ways, like very practically, I think, like, operating in teams is a very useful way to kind of counteract that. And so, for example, whenever we're doing a sprint, there are at least two kind of coaches working together. There's someone focused on community management. So that's a very kind of, again, an operations approach. Like there is, say, a 3-member unit, and that 3-member team working, and so the image is, we're on the sidelines, the team's on the playing field, and so the team is engaged in the thick of action. We're able to kind of operate, and so that's one level where different people are seeing, and so then when we kind of debrief, when we kind of review things, then that there is a natural balancing that happens there. I think the second, of course, is at a personal level, like personal practices and ways of cultivating kind of this focus on seeing the reality, and so that involves, of course, there's a meditation component to it, which I think, again, so much essence of it is, again, seeing and perception. So I think perception, like, there have been many different sources of inspiration. I think meditation is one. Again, sports is another great one, because you can't think, like, the ball's going to come hit you in the face, and so then being, again, honing your perception through a sport is something, and at various points, like, I've used tennis and basketball and other kinds of things. There's a beautiful book, actually, which was one of my original inspirations, called The Inner Game of Tennis. And The Inner Game of Tennis is one of the kind of pioneering books in sports psychology. But interestingly, like, I personally found a deep spiritual angle there, similar to what you were saying earlier. And that deep spiritual angle is again, like, there's always two games that are happening, right? There's the outer game, there's the game that's being played in the mind and the heart. And so, again, perceiving, like, what the outer game is versus getting caught up in our own chatter. So I think listening, perception, like, all of these are practices. So, a cornerstone of every sprint that we do is, deep listening. We start there. I think listening to one another and actually listening to, like, coming into this call, like, I had a lot of thoughts, like, I had scribbled all these notes, and I'm sure it was similar. And so getting out of that chatter, like, seeing Abhishek, seeing Ashok Kejal as well, and so just, like, tuning in to like, what's happening in this moment right now in this room. So I think those are small things.
Yeah, no, I think that's the practice. And whatever little I've seen the work that you do at CollabX, I think you're able to bring in some simplicity also and kind of simplify the complexity to make it accessible to people. I think that itself is something that I feel requires a state of mind.
Yes.
Is able to declutter and focus on what matters, right? I think that's, and that also, I think, is a product of a mind which is, or a team of people whose minds come together to own it, right? And otherwise, there's always so much to do, and you can keep doing more and more and more, and lost the illusion of doing, right? Because doing also can become an escape. Doing can become
totally.
You can end up doing hundreds of things instead of that one shot. And I think, there is, and it's probably a conversation for yet another jam, but there is something better on what happened with doing for it to become that, right? And I think what you're trying to do, or what even all of us who are trying to do this, is to restore the elegance of minimalist, simple doing what matters. Something in that tone. Is that fair to say? Is that what we're...
Yeah, very, very. I think it resonates, and that's why I'm smiling, because like, there's a story, and this is a story, I think, that connects very strongly with this, that we often share. Again, it's, if I don't think, and Collab has actually gone ahead and articulated its culture, like, in a very explicit way. Like we've actually done a lot, and allowed, we have certain things at the foundation, but one of those things would be socks and shoes, right? And so many of the teams we work with, it's become part of, like, the internal kind of language now, socks and shoes. And the story comes from this basketball coach, John Wooden, very famous, legendary basketball coach, UCLA, coached at the college level, and like, famous because won many championships. So outer game results were there, like, had one of the longest winning streaks of any basketball coach. So all of those wins are there, but was also a great teacher. And so one of the things he used to do is, in college, like, the freshman group is coming in, right? So these are new students, 18-year-olds, who are coming in, ready to play for a top basketball team. Coach Wooden is famous. They come to the locker room, and they're excited to get some maybe magical gyan, insight, some amazing training kind of ritual or something. And what Coach Wooden used to do year after year is get them to learn how to wear their socks and shoes, right? And so he used to start by actually putting on. So he used to take off his socks and shoes. He used to be barefoot, and then he started wearing his own socks. He used to, like, iron out the creases, teach people. And so he used to spend the whole first training session just
Wow.
focused on getting people to wear their socks and shoes. And so obviously, like everyone was stunned, like what's going on? They're curious. They're like, okay, is this guy gone crazy? But then he used to, of course, he used to bring in a bit of drama and all because he had done it so many times. But essentially, his, what he said was, like, if you don't wear your socks correctly and you don't iron out all the creases, then you start playing, you'll get blisters. If you start getting blisters, they're painful. You're not going to be able to play the whole game. If you can't play the game, then you're not going to be able to help your team win. And if you can't win, then that championship is anyways not going to happen. Right. And so I think for me, that is a beautiful story of being able to know which details matter. Now, the takeaway from this could be like suddenly all these basketball coaches are training their kids or their players to wear socks and shoes. I think that's operations which is mindless. Right. So just getting people to keep like going through this ritual of how to wear your socks and shoes is mindless. But having an understanding that it is focusing on this detail that impacts the win and impacts the game. I think that is the wisdom of experience, of doing, of culture. All of that comes together there.
Thank you. That's a very, very rich and beautiful story, Arhan. And I think it's a great time to pause also and go on this delicious story. Thank you so much for that. Story itself is like it's like the takeaway gift and present for all of us to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've had a lot of fun. I think you said, what is your intention? I think having fun. So I'm definitely checking that off. So thank you for this.